order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council. I'm the Chair, Robert Lilligren, joined by a quorum of the committee. Welcome, everyone. It's been a while. Nice to see you. We'll just move through the agenda if we may. First is the approval of the agenda, and if there are no changes from committee members, we'll just take it as approved. Great, thank you. Next is approval of the minutes of the September 6th, 2022 Community Development Committee. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. Any discussion, additions, changes, corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. We'll move on to our sole non-consent business item. For the day, it's item 2022-254. It's the 2023 Annual Public Housing Agency Plan Approval. And Ms. Paulson is here. Stephanie, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm not used to being the first non-consent item. I'm feeling all out of sorts. I'm normally the tail or the caboose, so.
You're the lead today.
I know, it's a change. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm here to talk to you about the annual PHA plan, the 2023 annual PHA plan. I saw you earlier this year just to talk to you as an information item and have been engaging with you a little bit throughout the year, so this is our official action item. Like you know, as a reminder, this is our annual PHA plan, so the 2023 annual PHA plan. HUD requires that we submit an annual plan every year, and it serves as a guide and informs HUD kind of what our short-term goals and priorities are in serving the region. We are also required to submit a 5-year plan. We are in an approved plan right now. It's 2020 through 2024, and we do it every 5th year. This kind of gives HUD a guide for our long-term plans. So how we plan and things that we can't do annually, and generally what we do is we update in our annual PHA plan how we've worked to meet the kind of general ideas that we've laid out in our 5-year plan. Like I said, the annual plan is submitted every year to HUD. Just to give a little update, here's what we said we wanted to do long range, and here's how we're meeting those goals every year. As a part of the PHA plan, the annual plan, we host a resident advisory board, and actually our HRA manager of outreach and special initiatives is hosting them more regularly to engage with the families that we serve in a variety of topics. We have one coming up just as a fun share about our HCV homeownership to engage more thoroughly with the residents that we serve who have expressed great interest in HCV homeownership, and I also know this is an initiative of the council, and so we are moving that along. The Metro HRA heard 2 major themes in our resident advisory board this year. One was that rent limits do not align with what's happening in the rental market right now. And so we will be coming to you in November to talk to you about small area fair market rents. HUD has released those limits, and we're working with our research team and taking a look very closely to see what we can do to balance the needs of the families that we serve with the budget, so how those can work in harmony, and then kind of weighing out impacts. The other thing, kind of theme that we heard very clearly was that families are very interested in us exploring a homeownership program. We continue to work with Minneapolis Public Housing to explore this and have a meeting every 4 to 6 weeks with a manager there. I'm meeting with a manager there to work through what it would look like. We have a informational meeting scheduled with a housing authority in California to talk about how they set up their program, because they have a market very similar to the Minneapolis metro area market. So what were your pain points? What did you learn? What would you do if you could, if you could redo it, what would you do? Just to continue to guide this thought process. As a part of our annual PHA plan, we submit our HCV administrative plan. It's required by HUD as a supporting document to the PHA plan that just kind of outlines our primary policies, and it contains also some mandatory and discretionary policies. So it's kind of like what HUD says you must do, and then PHA mays, so discretion where we've exercised it. And it must be available for public review. We did not do any major changes this year in our HCV admin plan. We had some slight policy language developed as a part of the community choice demonstration, which just was some waitlist things and community choice demonstration required added language. We also clarified some language to match our current reasonable accommodation process and tenant selection and annual re-exam process, and had a couple citation corrections that HUD updated some CFRs, and so we did that as well. We had a public comment period, as we do every year through August 31st, 2022. Our public hearing was held on August 15th, and there is a typo. We had 3 verbal commenters at our public hearing. In the public hearing comments requested that Metro HRA commit to awarding project-based vouchers annually. This was a discussion that we had with you all last year at our annual PHA plan. And it continues to be something that the PHA struggles with. How do we balance the needs of project-based vouchers with tenant-based vouchers? It's a give-take. We don't know what our budget's gonna do every year, and so it's difficult for us to commit, though we will offer an award as frequently as we can and know that it is a wonderful resource for our community. So in conclusion, I'm here today asking that you approve the 2023 annual PHA plan, including changes to the Housing Choice Voucher Admin Plan as described in the report and attachments, authorize the Metropolitan Council Chair to execute the required certifications, and direct staff to submit the final PHA plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Paulson, for your work on this and for your team's work as well, and for the presentation. Comments or questions from committee members? Councilmember Bento.
I want to say thank you also. This is really hard work, and it's getting harder. And I will tell you that I'm going to vote for this today, but it's a hard vote because those project-based vouchers are really important as well. I had a Zoom meeting work group, is whether or not we can really get serious about having a conversation with policymakers at the state and federal level about funding that deals with building housing. And whether it's done via project-based vouchers or some other sort of funding source, that we get serious about it. I feel like we're kind of chasing ourselves, and I find it exhausting and frankly, pretty unsatisfying. So, and that is not a criticism of anything that we're doing as an organization. We're doing the best we can, but it is a challenge to us and to all of our partners to see what we can do to get some public policy that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further comments or questions? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. Councilmember Vento, I appreciate your comments and your passion and acknowledgement of the challenges that we have in the community with housing. And we need to take some initiatives, I think, to kick it up a notch. And what comes to mind is partnership with other organizations, including a broad array of individuals that are involved in policymaking, to actually get this done, because we can't do it as an organization ourselves. And we need to have partners who are making policy decisions work with us to provide opportunities for more housing and support.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, questions, comments? And thank you, council members, for weighing in. I think we would all agree with your statement. So Ms. Paulson has proposed that we approve the 2023 annual public housing agency plan, including changes to the housing choice voucher administrative plan as described in the report and attachments. Also to authorize the Met Council Chair to execute the required certifications, and direct staff to submit the final PHA plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Is there a motion?
Motion
Thank,
to approve.
thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Councilmember Cummings. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Yeah, Councilmember
Mr. Chair,
Vento.
yeah, if I could just add one more thing. There
Please.
was a really interesting article in yesterday's Star Tribune about what the Hennepin County folks are doing with regard to housing, and I would recommend reading it. It's very interesting. Regrettably, not all of us have the resources or the taxing authority that they have, but it's still an instructive article, and I'd encourage folks to read it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Great, thank you. Moving on our agenda and to our information items, the first information item is the Community Development Division 2023 to 2028 Capital Improvement Program, and Nick Henderson is here to present. Welcome, Mr. Henderson.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Nick Hendrikson, Finance Manager for the Community Development Division, and today I'm going to provide a brief overview of the annual update to the capital development, community development's capital budget, and review the Metro HRA and Regional Parks proposed 23-28 capital improvement plan. So before we get into any program details, just review a few key items that you'll hear in this presentation. So the capital program is a multi-year program that represents the authorized and planned projects. The authorized capital plan, or the ACP, is a multi-year authorization for projects where funding has been secured. The capital budget is the amount that is expected to be spent within a given year, and this budget is amended throughout the year in our quarterly budget amendment process. And then the capital improvement plan, or the CIP, is our 6-year plan where funding sources have been identified but have not yet been approved or secured. So in the community development's capital program, we have the Parks Capital Program, and we also have developed a capital program for Metro HRA for the 153 properties that are owned by the Met Council. And just as a quick history, at a high level, we have statutory authority to develop housing units, and the council acted in 1999 to establish the Family Affordable Housing Program. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development provided the council with $28 million, and the council purchased 150 units on the open market, and we still operate those same properties today. And most recently in '22, 3 more units were purchased through a partnership with the city of Edina. So, as these properties age, we need to preserve our assets. So from a budget perspective, we're continuing to budget small and routine repairs in the annual operating budget. But what has changed is that large improvements are programmed and tracked in our capital program. So as an example, small ongoing repairs might be fixing a broken window, but capital projects would be replacing all the windows in the home or replacing the entire roof. So these projects will be determined each year when we complete the asset assessment of those properties. For asset preservation on the homes that we own, we currently have $600,000 already in the authorized ACP, and we are planning about $250,000 in future spending per year using the program's rental income for capital repairs to preserve those 153 properties owned by the Met Council. And this will end the housing portion of the capital program. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Questions on that part of the report? Councilmember Cummings.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the authorized 600 and the plan 250 per year, does that include the improvements or whatever's necessary to the units that we're partnering with the city of Edina? Or is this outside of that?
This would be, Mr. Chair, committee members, this would be outside of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions on that portion of the report? Any questions? Seeing none, let's go on.
All right, so yeah, we'll move into the Parks Capital Program. One of the things I would like to mention is that most of how we program the Park CIP is driven by existing policy and state statute. So as we move into parks and open space, just to touch on a few, highlights of the park system, with 56 regional parks and park reserves totaling over 54,000 acres, over 400 miles of interconnected trails, 8 special recreation features. The system provides a wealth of opportunity for recreation, exercise, and preserves significant green space and wildlife habitat. And in 2021, the regional park system had over 64 million visits. So this graphic and the next series of graphics will walk through at a high-level reminder the role each plays in our capital program. So the state of Minnesota, Metropolitan Council, and the parks implementing agencies are all impacted by a number of pressures. These include legislative action, economic and environmental factors, and regional needs and outcomes. So overall, the regional parks open space system is really a partnership between the state, the council, and the parks implementing agencies. The state of Minnesota plays several roles at a very high level. The state legislation created the regional parks and open space system, defined the role and authority of the council within that parks and open space system, and appropriates funding. So at the state agency and commission level, agencies and commissions help execute legislation, including passing through funding and running competitive grant processes to award grant funding. Under state law, the council is charged with overseeing the long-range planning, acquisition, and development of the regional parks and trails. With broad public engagement, the council develops regional policy and standards in Thrive MSP 2040 and the Regional Parks Policy Plan. So these plans address issues related to regional parks policy, plans, and grants. The Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, or MPOSC, helps the council develop a long-range plan and an acquisition and development program that includes funding for regional parks. Council staff will review the Parks and Trails Master Plan for conformity with regional policy, ensures all projects funded in our capital program are in the approved master plan, and serves as a fiscal agent to ensure funds are spent in line with various programs and funding source requirements. The parks are operated by partnering cities, counties, and special districts, and each have their own governing boards. Implementing agencies lead regional parks and trails master planning, including public engagement. They operate and work to acquire and develop land for regional parks and trails. They also protect and conserve natural resources to provide outdoor recreation for public enjoyment. So I think you guys have seen this before, but when you put the entire system together, the capital project life cycle looks like this. It's always ongoing, but if we start at the top, the project's funded through our capital program, except for legislative earmarks aligned with Thrive MSP 2040 and the Regional Parks Policy Plan adopted by the council. The parks implementing agencies engage with the public to develop master plans and to develop specific capital projects, which are prioritized and included in their agency's capital improvement plans. So the council also develops our capital improvement plan at the program level, which I'll actually talk about in the upcoming slides. So once this funding is secured, it's brought into the council's authorized capital plan program through a budget amendment, and the funding is then passed through the implementing agencies through grant agreements. And then the cycle is rounded out through performance measures, and the council, in partnership with the regional parks implementing agencies, work together to advance equitable use of the regional park system throughout the cycle. So we know that 100% of the capital funds are passed through to the implementing agencies in the following programs. This graphic shows 3 of the 4 grant programs are sourced through state funds, and several of which are distributed by formula. You can also see that the council provides a match to state bonding and the land acquisition grant program and fully funds the equity grant program. These funds have been passed through via grant agreements, and we currently have over 190 active grants valued at $133 million, and we are anticipating awarding about $237 million in grant funds between 23 to 28. So when looking at our revenue assumptions, when the council develops the capital improvement plan, we fund capital projects through, again, 4 primary revenue sources: legacy, environmental, and natural resource trust fund, the state of Minnesota bonds, and the council bonds. So every year, we make the most reasonable revenue assumptions that we can about the funding that will come to the parks and open space system. We do get direct appropriations, commonly referred to as earmarks from the state, but we don't actually plan revenue in our CIP for them. For the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, we take the most recent appropriation or the data that we know at that time and apply an estimated growth. So we started with the dollar amount from 2022 and then assumed a 2% annual inflation rate every year. So by 2028, we estimate that that funding will increase to about just under $25 million. For the Environmental and Natural Resource Trust Fund, as a reminder, these dollars are awarded through a competitive grant process, and we are anticipating the funding about $750,000 on average per year, with about $500,000 council match. For the state of Minnesota bonds, we are not assuming any growth on state bonds. We're assuming $15 million for the bonding years with a $10 million council match. And as a reminder, we have a policy to match $2 of council bonds for every $3 of ENRTF, state bonds, and legacy fund acquisition, and we can have up to $40 million of regional bonds outstanding at any given time, but we've never actually come close to this amount. And our CIP also assumes the council will fund the equity grant program. So for the CIP, this slide calls out the notable modifications that we made. So as a reminder, we started with our approved 22-27 CIP. And basically our adjustment is primarily removing 2022 from that CIP and then adding 2028 to the CIP. So first, we anticipate the council will continue to match state of Minnesota appropriation as directed by statute and policy. So this slide is showing that we have, for 2028, we've programmed the above anticipated legacy, state bonding, ENRTF, and council bond revenue and expenses into the CIP. So as I mentioned earlier, the Parks and Trails Legacy Funds and the state bonding are distributed to the parks implementing agencies based on a formula. So this chart is calling out the inputs for that formula. So the operating and maintenance and Parks and Trails legacy formulas are statute driven, whereas state bonding is defined in the regional parks policy plan. So this chart illustrates how the data collected from the implementing agencies feed into calculating a weighted average for the distribution of those legacy funds and state bonding. So we start with the operating and maintenance. So the data collected for the operation and maintenance is used to calculate the distribution amounts for legacy. And the non-local visits and population that's used for legacy is also used for state bonding. And so the most recent data for each of these inputs, we use to project the agency's distribution amounts for the 23-28 CIP. So as discussed in the previous slide, legacy funds are allocated to the parks implementing agencies and according to a formula set in state statute, and the bond dollars are allocated based on a formula in the parks policy plan. So in formula allocations, we have about $56 million remaining to spend on currently authorized funding and about $203 million planned in the next 2023-28 CIP. These planned dollars are budgeted at the program level in the CIP, and in this case, anticipated implementing agencies' shares of state bonding and legacy dollars. So this slide summarizes the future land acquisition program. So we have $11 million left to spend on currently authorized funding in the plan, and plan on 31 million for new land acquisition projects in this 2023-2028 CIP. As we discussed earlier, land acquisition projects are funded by ERTF, Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, along with that council match. For the other category, this includes the direct appropriations from the legislature and the equity grant program. So we have 24 million in current authorized spending, and this is really made up of 23 million from previous direct appropriations, where the council is passing those funds through to specific projects, and just over 1 million in the equity grant program that's currently authorized in the ACP. So for the 23-28 CIP, we have 3 million programmed for future projects in the Parks Equity Grant Program. So putting everything together, the Parks Capital Program is 404 million. This includes both our current 167 million in current authorized spending and the 237 in planned spending for the 23-28 CIP. If we look at the sources of funding, the state funds are 85% of the capital program, with the council's regional match making up that balance. And again, just a reminder, we don't, the council does not match the direct appropriations. And for the uses by department, this represents where the funding is going to go. So we know that 100% of those funds will be passed through the implementing agencies. And so you can see that just over 300 million will go to the implementing agencies based on that funding formula. We also know that another 45 million will go to the implementing agencies through the land acquisition program on a first come, first served basis that we've specifically called out here. That 52 million is for the legislative earmarks or those direct appropriations, and then the remaining 5 million represents the equity grant program. So this slide is showing the capital program timeline for the council. On October 12th, you will see the capital program for all divisions rolled together. Then we'll have the public comment draft on October 28th. Then we'll enter into the public comment period. And then again on December 14th will be the adoption of the capital program and the annual capital plan. So thank you for your time. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hendrikson. Questions and comments, Councilmember Cummings?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to comment, these years are all 2021 on this slide instead of
the dates.
2022.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If you go back a
The
slide.
capital program timeline has them all happening in 2021.
You are correct, I'm sorry.
Living in the past. For the discussion, Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Wolf, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I really liked the way the system alignment was laid out because it shows the partnership that the Met Council has with the state and the implementing agencies and how much, we plan to spend. I think it's important to highlight that that is the amount that we plan to spend, but doesn't necessarily say what the need is for maintaining all of our parks and trails. I think that that's really important also to highlight that, we don't get all of the money that is needed to manage all of our resources. And it would be good, I think, as a committee to have a discussion about that, because it's more than just managing the money that we have, it's highlighting the money that we need as well from our state partner. And so I think we need to have more discussions about that and that we're short. The other thing that I wanted to mention is what happens when one of our implementing agencies decides that there are some parks that are, very well maintained and other parks that are not. I've had some cities, or a city in particular, talked to me about their need to get more maintenance for their parks from their implementing agency, which would be their county. So I think if we could have a discussion as a community development committee about those types of concerns or issues or needs, I think that would be really helpful because, you know, what do we do when we lack resources? What does our implementing agency do when they don't have the funding from, you know, our state to manage all of our parks and trails?
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Lee, then Councilmember Vento. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It works out well that I'm following behind Councilmember Chambliss because it's not just the need, the implementing agencies are funding a large portion of those capital projects. This talks about what the state passes through to us, and then we add some and pass through. But the bulk of the funding is on the backs of the implementing agencies, and they're using taxpayer dollars from property taxes to pay for that. And with the regional park system having the equivalent of a state park role in our region, that's extra taxation on just metro homeowners and business owners to pay for these parks that Greater Minnesota doesn't have to pay. So it's patently unfair. And then it talks about $15 million of bonding in bonding years from the state, but we ask for that. That doesn't mean that's what we get. It's been much less than that. If you include all the earmarks, you might get there. But the amount that we've actually been getting to share amongst the agencies has been getting smaller and smaller each year, which is really disappointing. If we did get 15 million to share amongst everybody, that would be great, but it's not been anywhere close to that. So the need is much greater than what is reflected in the presentation here.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Hendrikson. My question is on slide 18. And so just to be clear for my information, the equity grant funds, the 1% with 5 million, is that over the next 5 years from 23 to 28? The 5 million?
Mr. Chair, committee members, that 5 million is going to include what's already been authorized in our authorized capital plan and also what's in the CIP for the plan CIP.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I probably don't need to say anything after Councilmember Wolf spoke. She said with greater detail and eloquence kind of what I was going to get at. And I think it might be a good idea for us to perhaps have a joint meeting with MPOSC. I know we attempted to do that on another occasion, and I don't think it worked out from an agenda standpoint, but if we could figure out a time, date, location where, to the extent that it's possible for us to have our agenda really prioritize that conversation, I think it would be good. Because MPOSC members share the concern about funding and maintenance and equity, and equity as it relates to taxpayers and the burden that the metro area has to carry. I think Councilmember Wolf's remark about this being the equivalent of a state park, it's probably the equivalent of multiple state parks to some extent at this point.
I mean, the function is the same as state.
Right, right, yeah. So anyway, that would be my suggestion. I don't know, Emmett and Lisa, if that's something that can be done, but I think it would be very valuable.
Thank you, Councilmember. Did you want to comment? Yeah, please.
Mr. Chair, council members, certainly is one of our major themes that we're working on as part of the 2050 update to the parks policy is sustainable funding. It's the kind of core theme of most of the conversations we have with our implementing agency partners. So certainly I think that is a ripe topic for conversation between the MPOSC and this committee as well to help guide that discussion and our next steps as part of that work.
Councilmember Vento.
The other thing I'd like, Mr. Chair, just to add is if legislative candidates or anybody, candidate for office shows up at your door, talk to them about the needs that our regional parks have. The funding provided last session was embarrassing. Better to say the lack thereof. And when you look at the counts, you know, so many parts of our region really faded and dwindled during COVID. The parks were what sustained people, physically, mentally, emotionally. It was amazing. And friends of mine who discovered parks that they had never known about just were awestruck. So I think we need to seize every opportunity we have between now and Election Day to drive home the importance of our parks with the people who want to make decisions up the hill. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the report? Any discussion? So it's information only, so no action for tonight, but we will have some decisions to make down the road. Mr. Hendrikson, thanks for your work and for your report on this. And we will move on to our second information item. It's the Comprehensive Plan Amendment Administrative Review Process. And Ms. Torres is here to present. Welcome, Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, and Chair and committee members.
Good
I'm
afternoon.
Angela Torres, the Senior Manager of Local Planning Assistance. Today, I'd like to ask for your feedback on the Council's Administrative Review Guidelines for Comprehensive Plan Amendments. I thought it was appropriate. It's often a topic of conversation. What's the status? So I thought it would be appropriate to give a quick update on where we're at right now with regards to the 2040 comprehensive plan, since this conversation actually takes us into amending those plans. You can see we are at 95% of comp plans authorized. That's a lot of work, not only from local governments and their staff, but the council's staff as well. So we've received 165 of 168. We just received one new one that we'd never seen before, so we're making some progress inch by inch. We're working on helping communities that still need that assistance. We have a couple plans that are incomplete, working again with them to provide that technical assistance. We have one complete plan that is on the agenda for committee review already, and then the big number, 159 comp plans that have been authorized. We have 3 that we haven't seen yet, but we're working on reaching out with those local governments as well. So I just want to give a little bit of background on the administrative review guidelines. The current administrative review guidelines have been in place since 2010. They were reviewed in 2016 and affirmed with no changes at that time, but some form of administrative review process has been in place since 1987, and then those are updated over time. Administrative reviews are conducted by council staff with the delegated authority granted by the council. Committee review is not required, and that means obviously then it doesn't go to Metropolitan, the full council either. Administrative reviews do have to meet all of the adopted criteria, and staff, even so, may still direct an amendment to the committee for review if there are potential challenges or conflict with those amendments. Typically, the administrative review process is seen as an expedited process, and we complete that review. We really try to complete that review within the initial 15 business days that we're required by statute to respond to local governments. We can extend that. We try not to, because this is meant to be an expedited process, but it's much shorter than the 60 to 120 days that it can take when we bring an amendment to committee for review. The proposed changes are really meant to provide clarity and transparency, both for council staff as they're doing their work, as well as local governments as they understand and plan for and schedule their work at the local level. Between 2019 and 2022, there were 217 amendments that were reviewed. The majority were done in 2021, 115 of those. 28%, though, 61 of those amendments were reviewed by the council. 156 were reviewed administratively. The criteria sets out expectations of what the council will review, and then during this time period, the 2019 to 2022 period, council reviewed amendments that included issues like community designation changes, land use changes that exceed 80 acres. That's one of the thresholds within the criteria. We had some policy issues, largely related to housing policy with the new housing policy plan that's to be expected as communities adjust over time. We had 43 that had a net change of over 100 units, and 34 were associated with a proposed development of some sort. These are meant not these are not mutually exclusive. This is just meant to provide kind of a scale and scope of a lot of the amendments that the council has reviewed over time. Like I said, the policy issues were in large part related to housing policy, but we do see communities submit subsequent amendments over time to resolve some of those policy issues. And a lot of times it takes time for local governments to work through that process. Where do they want to guide different land uses and different densities to accommodate for something? Perhaps one development dips them below for a little bit, but they do resolve those things over time largely. The committee also reviewed 43 amendments that had a net change, which is a difference, whether that's an increase or a decrease from the previous plan in 100 housing units. So the committee does review whether that's a positive or a negative capacity change. The committee does review those. 34 had an increase in housing capacity, 9 had a decrease in housing capacity, and I just want to mention a small error on my PowerPoint. 10 had a net change exceeding 100 units that were more than 80 acres, not less than 80 acres. The majority of them are small in size, but that arrow was meant to be the opposite direction. Sorry about that. You can also see the number of amendments broken down into ranges of net change in this table that was taken from information on page 2 of the staff report. We looked at where amendments were coming from in the region. Emerging suburban edge communities submitted the most amendments that required full council review. Suburban edge and suburban communities also had higher numbers of amendments that required full council review compared to other community designations. I mentioned before that clarity and transparency were the primary drivers of the proposed updates. You can see here the description of the proposed changes for the 11 criteria. Clarification helps both staff and local governments better understand how determinations are made and the method of calculation when we have to actually crunch some numbers. This is a slide showing criteria 1 through 7. The proposed changes are shown here with changes marked to the existing criteria. Items in red or also underlined and strike through are new text additions for clarification, and items proposed to be deleted are in red and shown with a strike through. Eligible comp plan amendments must satisfy all criteria. So you can see items 3 and 4 are proposed to be consolidated for clarity. If an amendment is found to be consistent with the more general term council policy, it will inherently be consistent with both Thrive and the housing policy plan because those are policies of the council. Item 6 clarifies that affected jurisdictions like watershed districts, state agencies, school districts, and others are included in that section as well. Criteria 8 through 11. The first item there, criteria 8, is considered really to be a completeness determination. Communities would still be required to do this. It just doesn't, in staff's determination, really kind of weigh in as to whether or not it meets eligibility criteria. Currently, staff forward amendments to committee if there's a net change of 100 housing units, whether that's an increase or a decrease. Renumbered item 8 clarifies the current practice and clarifies how that calculation is completed. Item 10 includes clarifying language related to the Ag Preserves program, and the last footnote is an addition of that statement that indicates that council staff can determine the need for committee review of any item, even if it meets the eligibility criteria. That's added as a point of clarification in case we ever do feel that the most appropriate review is done by the full council. In your staff report, I did pose a few questions for you to kind of prime the discussion today. I'll leave these on the screen as we have that discussion, but I will ask the committee if they have any feedback on those issues of clarity, of thresholds, or the application of net change to the criteria, or if the committee has any additional questions that may require more investigation. So at this time, Councilmember Lilligren, I would ask.
Thank you, Ms. Torres, for the report, and thanks to your team for the work on this. And so Ms. Torres has brought some questions forward for discussion. So committee members, I would welcome any responses or any other discussion on the report as presented. Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. Torres. I have a question about the very first thing you said. You said we had a city that just submitted their plans for the first time, and so I was wondering, is that city recently annexed or new to our system, or are there just delinquent cities who, how do we manage that relationship every 10 years or every other year? Or
Ms. Torres.
Chair and Councilmember Lee, committee members, we often have communities that may lag in submitting their plan to us for a variety of reasons. This particular community isn't a grant-receiving community. There's no penalty for not submitting the plan to the council on time in 2018. And oftentimes there's challenges with local staff being able to help and prepare those plans. Our sector reps and local planning assistants provide as much technical assistance as possible. Sometimes it's unavailable for those local governments. I would say too that the pandemic exaggerated to a great deal a lot of the delinquent plans, as you say, that were submitted to the council. So I would say we always have a few that lag. That's normal. We just continue working with them and trying to connect with them. But I would say that in this situation, we probably have a few more than normal just because of the kind of extraordinary circumstances that communities were dealing with over the last several years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Committee members, responses to the questions? Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss.
I guess one of my responses is that for criteria number 3, I was happy to see that it's more clear in adding that we're consistent, the plans are consistent with both Thrive 2040 and the housing policies, with the housing policies having additional emphasis. And the other proposed changes seem, very reasonable to me. I like the fact that it's kind of highlighted so we can see exactly what has been modified. In many of our discussions, we've talked about, is there kind of an alternate path that we can have for cities that are smaller, maybe streamlining the process, potentially, modifying, how these criteria are met so that it's easier. And, we haven't really talked about solutions, so I'm going to throw any ideas out right now, but I think it's come up many times with our council that is something that maybe could be looked at.
Chair and
Yeah, please, Ms. Torres.
Chair and committee members, Councilmember Chambliss, I'd like to emphasize that this is related to amendments to those comprehensive plans. I do agree with you. There are a few different things we've been kind of batting around as ideas on how we could better help communities through the initial planning portion of the comp plan process. Before we get to the amending part, we will be connecting with local governments, providing some options and ideas and batting around a few things with them. But we'll also be bringing forward a few suggestions and ideas on how we can better help, especially small cities, especially those communities that don't have local staff, really take some of that load off of them. Statute does allow the council to provide direct planning services, and we're looking at doing something along those lines.
Makes sense.
Thank you, thanks. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you've done a great job in terms of clarity with the updating. And as far as the trigger numbers, thresholds, I would be okay with upping them a little bit. Some of these are pretty routine that we're still having to go through the council. So I would be open to a bigger threshold for our review. I mean, especially when our ability to vote on these is, we can only say no if it has a substantial departure from regional system plans. If it's going to be something we have to say yes to anyway, it's sort of just wasting everybody's time.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What Councilmember Wolf said, I think is great, but I think in general, what you have proposed here accomplishes the goals of transparency and clarity and simplifying things, which I think is ultimately what we're trying to do. So I thought that in the way that you explained it is really useful to me, I think, and to us as a committee in understanding what the goals are for this. But I think it looks good, but I agree with Councilmember Wolf. Good point.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Responses? So, Ms. Torres, I would agree with what's been said here tonight in that, if it is worth reexamining the thresholds so that fewer come before us, that's worth looking at. Also, I think the net change of both increase and decreases 100 units makes sense. So yes, and do they help clarify language? Yes. Cool. Anyone else? Committee members? This is your opportunity. All right, thank you, Ms. Torres. I hope you got what you needed out of the conversation tonight.
I did. Thank you very much, Chair and committee members. We'll do some evaluation on those thresholds, and we'll bring that item back for your further consideration.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And committee members, we will move on to our final information item for the evening. It's the Regional Park System Administrative Process for Minor Master Plan Amendments. And Mr. Mullin and Ms. Kinney are here to present. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Good to see everyone today. Thanks for having us. I'm Emmett Mullin, the Regional Parks Manager, and I'm with my colleague, Tracey Kinney. She's a park planner. And we're here today to discuss a proposal to create an administrative process for minor regional park and trail master plan amendments. Sort of a mouthful. And it is no accident that we're following on the heels of Angela Torres, because we really want to mirror our local planning assistance colleagues in creating a similar yet separate process to administratively review minor routine park and trail plan amendments. So today, the other thing I want to be really clear about is we're asking your permission to move forward to develop this criteria. And if you give us this permission, we would then come back to request, or with a proposal. So we don't have that proposal today. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm in control.
Do it yourself.
Greg, listen to me, please. Thank you. Okay. Excuse me. So the requirement to review park and trail master plans and plan amendments comes from the state legislature. That's an authority that was delegated to us by the state legislature. And this is just a really simple diagram that sort of highlights the master plan amendment process. And it basically says that when there's a significant anticipated change to a plan, it becomes necessary for the implementing agency to do a plan amendment. There are really minor reasons to do a plan amendment, like a super minor fix of a boundary of a park or trail. That's just one example. But Tracey's now going to talk about the proposed administrative amendment process and why we think it will be a benefit to both the regional park implementing agencies, our partners with this system, as well as you, the council. Tracey.
Thanks, Emmett.
Greg, next slide, please.
Thanks, thank you, Emmett. Good afternoon. Hi. My name is Tracey Kinney, and I'm a senior planner in the Parks Unit of Community Development. As Emmett mentioned, and as you are aware, the council reviews park and trail plans for consistency with council plans and policies. The proposed administrative amendment process would authorize the regional administrator or designee to administratively review certain amendments that would qualify as minor master plan amendments. Qualifying amendments will be reviewed for consistency and conformity to the policy plan, similar to other requests, and include this criteria that provides clear guidance as to what qualifies as a minor administrative amendment. So the addition of an administrative process would be a benefit to the regional park system. It would provide increased customer service to the regional park system's implementing agencies through time saved preparing traditional plan amendments and quicker council review time. Council staff estimates that council committee review time would be reduced from approximately 60 days to 15 business days. It would also include a reduction of council committee public meeting review time, so that's time that you're taking today, and council staff work. And finally, it will encourage our partner agencies to update their regional park and trail plans more frequently to better reflect their future direction. So where did this idea come from? You might ask. Well, over the last 4 years, council staff have noticed characteristics of amendments emerge that can be described as minor housekeeping amendments. Staff reviewed all of the amendments and found that 10% of the amendments, or 6 plans out of 62, have similar aspects. That's right, we have a slightly different capacity as LPA. And this is shown in Table 1 of your business item. Additionally, council staff anticipate a rise in minor amendments due to our council-led project in partnership with our agencies to update the regional park system's mapping database. So we're excited about that. That might not be something you know about, but it's a huge effort and update that we're working with our partners. So this effort is reconciling mapping data with the plans on file to capture the full reality of each facility. So if you can imagine going from the 50,000 scale all the way down to the parcel level scale, we're hoping that there's not many errors, but there might be some errors in the process. Next slide, please. So key to this administrative process is the development of criteria, as you keep hearing, right? So a minor amendment is one. So key to this thing is this criteria. And what we are talking about is this minor amendment. So what is a minor amendment? We're talking about these routine amendments, very small ones that do not have material impact to a park or trail and are not political in nature, just generally off the bat. But we're going to be coming back with your support to develop this far more in depth. So you'll see a far more refined proposal in the future. But first and foremost, this criteria is that all candidates must conform to all council policies and plans. And then for additional criteria, council staff looked to the characteristics of the previous housekeeping amendments that I had mentioned in the last slide. So that's that table 1 in your business item. So these criteria fall into 3 buckets. This is public-to-public land exchanges, corrections, and then that the council consents to easement. So in terms of land conversion, land exchanges, we're talking about land conversions where a park implementing agency is doing a land conversion with a local agency. And these are usually very small in acreage, and we're considering ones that right now are 1 acre or less. And then the next is corrections, and this is what I was talking to you before. This is about those design errors or mapping errors that come up in the process. You might have seen one recently with Cleary Lake. That was very interesting, slightly like the 0.2 design error. And finally, council consents to easements. These are consents for non-material impacts like natural resource monitoring or underground utilities where the park or trail will be restored in its entirety. Of course, all of this is open for debate, but these are some things that we've been seeing in the study that we did to prepare for this item. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we have a running start. With your support and advice today, we would like to move forward with the development of this administrative process and work with the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission and our partner agencies to develop this proposal more fully. We will develop that criteria that we keep talking about and provide that provides clear guidance as to what qualifies as a minor master plan amendment. And then we'll return to you with a more refined proposal. So with that, Emmett and I thank you for your time and consideration, and we look forward to your thoughts and questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kinney. Mr. Mullin, thanks for this report. And comments from committee members? Questions? Councilmember Cummings, then Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple comments and then a couple questions. It's curious that there's never been a process, but so it's kind of about time. And the goals, as you state them, I mean, make so much sense. And to be able to drop from 60 days to 15, I mean, that's such a huge benefit, not just to our staff, but also to the implementing agencies to be able to plan and move forward. I think that's, and again, the goal is simplicity and transparency and allowing things to move forward. Everybody knows that government moves pretty slowly, but anything we can do to pick up the pace a little bit while still complying with policy and so forth, I think is really, really important. So I think this is just great. My question is actually sort of when you talk about, Ms. Kinney, you talk about the mapping project. Is that what we got a taste of with the interns when they were here a month or so ago?
Mr. Mullin.
Councilmember Cummings and Chair, I think I should have reversed that.
Practice.
No, but it was a similar exercise with the same geographic information systems. That was, I think, someone on the research team looking at land values around parks and trails, which is an awesome project. This is actually looking at the data files for the parks and trails. It's basically the geographic description of them. And I'll give you a really quick example just because I love the details. But Scott County, when they were laying out Blakely Bluffs, it's this beautiful park reserve along the Minnesota River. And the shoreline, one of the shorelines has train tracks that goes along the riverway, and it's down in the floodplain, and it's super hard to get to, very mosquito-y. And the person who did the original boundary description missed 6 acres. They didn't describe 6 acres. So when they went, and there was a land exchange, they actually, the Minnesota DNR took a big chunk of the property and made it I think it was a scientific and natural area out of it. And but they found that they didn't account for 6 acres. And we said, that's great, the land's gonna be protected, but you can't transfer 6 acres that we didn't account for, so we had to do a master plan amendment first. It was a real hassle for Scott County to do because we moved, with due diligence and transparency, which is super important, but it also was just a correction of a mistake. So this process would allow us to correct that a lot more quickly, still with staff review and ensuring consistency with council policies.
That's a great explanation.
Thank you.
Really an indicator of what you're trying to do too, so.
Thank you.
Thank you, I think this is great.
Good example, thanks. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a great idea to streamline things for people. If we don't, if it's fixing a mistake, of course, we don't need to deal with that. The only part I have concern about is the underground utilities part, because we had an issue with our new Hastings wastewater plant that we're gonna put in, that we thought we would run the pipe where there was an existing utility easement, until we realized that the utility easement went through a native burial ground and they tore up some of the graves. So that part maybe needs some extra diligence, but everything else, fine.
Further discussion, input from committee members? Seeing none, I agree. I think this is a great direction to go, so encouraging. And the one part that kind of draws my attention is in the land exchanges, and then in parcels or exchanges that are not controversial or politically charged, and just I'm interested in how you determine that. And things can become politically charged or controversial really quickly and with very few parties involved. So I'll be interested to see when you bring the more developed policy forward, how we're determining that.
Thank you, committee members. Chair Lilligren, I just wanted to say that one you may remember was with the city of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and that Graco easement for, I think, 0.2 acres. That is less than the 1 acre threshold, yet it was worth over $1 million, and it wouldn't hit the criteria of not politically charged. Right. So, and the example about underground utility easements going through native burial ground, that would also hit that criteria. And so I think there is like a way to discern this, but I don't think it's simple. And so we will go back and really dig into these past examples. We'll work with our agencies, we'll work with our Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission and come back with a proposal that they can live with. Because I'm telling you that our Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission are going to be interested in this, and they're going to be like, you are taking authority away from the council. Like, they don't really want that, but I think that what we're saying here is it's really for the mundane, minor, not anything that should have transparent review.
True. Thank you. Committee members, anything else? Anything? All right. Ms. Kelly, Mr. Mullin, thanks for being here. Thanks for the report. We've come to the end of our agenda. Director Barajas, anything? No, Michelle? No. All right. Seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks for making coffee.
That was great. That was great.
Very good coffee.
Good coffee.
Slides anymore, so now he's making coffee.
Cool. This was interesting.
This is our first meeting in like a month.
It's, yeah.
Yeah.
5 weeks.
Yeah, because the September 19th one was canceled
Right.
at last minute, so.
Yeah.
Haven't met since September
Did so well
6th.
with my knee during my cold. I don't know what it was about.
Thank you.
Oh,
It's nice to have a little bit of space on our agendas to actually tackle some of our administrative